Let's do big picture. Let's start with the Democratic side. I mean, first of all, what a successful barnstorming tour here for Vice President Harris and her new running mate, hitting battleground state after battleground state, drawing these huge crowds, sharpening their message. And yes, in Arizona, that's important. The Vice President saying, look, I was a border state senator. I can talk about immigration. And here, this is a deal that was on the table, authored by one of the most conservative Republicans in the Senate, Lankford of Oklahoma, and Donald Trump killed it for political gain. And if she can keep hitting that message, those numbers in that poll we just showed will continue to close. I mean, I don't think there are many Democrats who think they're going to win on the issue of immigration, maybe not even win on the issue of the economy. But if they can mitigate the damage, and then Trump's advantage in those two categories shrunk dramatically from the lead he had over President Biden. That's significant. And we have seen now, we talk about trend lines on the show all the time in polling. Yes, those three states, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, they're all still within the margin of error. They're all still close. But the trend is heavily towards Harris, and it's rushing towards Harris in recent weeks. The vice president at this point throwing the equivalent of a no-hitter in the first 3 weeks of her campaign, hoping to keep that going with the Democratic convention next week. She will have obstacles in front of her, no doubt. But right now, she's on a roll. George Conway, not on a roll. Donald Trump, who is imploding. And there's been some terrific reporting over the weekend. The New York Times had a great story. I've been talking to sources who back up what Joe is just saying about how the Republicans are freaking out because Trump can't stay focused. We had that unhinged news conference last week. We had these fundraisers where he's giving private remarks, talking about crowd size, doubling down on his attacks about the vice president's identity, and then culminating in that Truth Social post, which I have Truth Social, I'm sorry to say, and I triple checked it to make sure it was a real post on his site, and it was real. And George, we now know that at this point, Donald Trump is so rattled about crowd sizes, he's taking up conspiracy theories from the fever swamps of the right, elevating it, maybe even believing it. It just reeks of desperation.
Yeah, as I've been yammering about for 5 or 6 years now, he's a deeply unwell man. He is a deeply psychologically disturbed individual. If he were a member of your family, you'd be staging an intervention and taking him in to a psychiatric hospital. And if Melania and Ivanka and Eric and Don Jr. care about their father, and I assume their father and husband, I assume they do, they would be doing that if they could. He is, as I've been saying, a narcissistic sociopath, a pathological narcissist, and a sociopath as defined by the American Psychiatric Association. And these are, historians will tell you, the traits of authoritarian dictators throughout history. And what we're seeing now is, as you put it, an implosion. And this, I believe, is what ultimately was always going to happen, the final implosion of Donald Trump. I mean, it's like Hitler, when Hitler was moving around divisions that didn't exist in the last 10 days of the war in the Führer bunker. I mean, he has completely lost it. This post is beyond question delusional. Anybody, I mean, but it was also inevitable, because what's happening here is he realizes he's gotten under more pressure than ever, because he's not just running for the presidency, he's running for his freedom. He's going to go to jail if he does not win the presidency, and he can see that now. And that's why he's doubling down on the unreality. It's partly it's for self-soothing, partly it's just because he can't help it. He's a pathological liar, being a sociopath. And what we're watching is I mean, we're going to make fun of it because it helps provoke him into self-destruction, which is what the country needs. But it's actually very, very sad.
Well, and I will say, Charlie Sykes, you don't have to have George Conway's point of view, and you don't have to be voting against Donald Trump to look at what happened this weekend and not be horrified. That is the reporting. Republicans absolutely horrified at a time where they need him to act rationally, at a time they need him to push back hard against Kamala Harris. He's going in the direction that they believe is the most destructive. And you can go back, as the New York Times neatly summarized, the past week and a half it's been terrible for him, where first he questioned whether Kamala Harris was black or not. Laughable for a woman who was in a historically black sorority at Howard University and has identified as a black woman her entire life. And then he goes to Georgia, and not only does he insult the extraordinarily popular Republican governor of Georgia, but he insults Brian Kemp's wife, which enrages Republican women across the state. And now, of course, this obsession at fundraisers that's unnerving his biggest supporters. He wrote a letter, I'm sure you saw this, to one of his biggest contributors insulting her, Miriam Adelson, and the widow of Sheldon Adelson, scaring some campaign workers into believing she won't contribute to him in the future. And now he's coming forward with the AI-generated stuff. And so Republicans fearful that he's doing the exact opposite of what he should do. This morning, the Wall Street Journal editorial page is suggesting that he attacks Kamala Harris on health care. With all due respect to the Wall Street Journal editorial page, I don't think that's going to stem those 15,000 person crowds. But I must say, were I a Republican strategist right now, I wouldn't know exactly what tack to take, because this is so reminiscent of how we Republicans were feeling in the run up to the 2008 election. There was a freight train going, 200 miles an hour, and Republicans had no idea how to stop it.
Yeah. And if only they had been warned. And by the way, as we're watching this, decomposition meltdown by Donald Trump, notice that not a single prominent Republican is looking at this and saying, hey, let's get off this train. This is deeply wrong. Let's, go in a different direction or change my vote. They're completely locked in. I also agree with you that what's really rattling Donald Trump is that this has become a cultural phenomenon and not simply a political phenomenon. But I want to go back to what George was saying. Yes, it is sad, and we can make fun of it. It is alarming, but it's also profoundly dangerous what is going on, because you look at that insane tweet, and it's not just that he's going down this rabbit hole of fever swamp conspiracy theories. He's using this as a way of saying that the Democrats are cheating, that Kamala Harris should be disqualified. Look, put this in the larger context of what's happening. This is pre-election denialism by Donald Trump. It's no mystery. Donald Trump is never going to graciously concede defeat in this election. He is already laying the groundwork for what's going to happen after November. And I think this is going to be an extraordinarily dangerous period. He has election deniers in key states. His base is psychologically not prepared for him to lose. And as George mentioned, this is a desperate man. Donald Trump will not simply lose the election. Donald Trump knows that if he is not elected president, he may be going to jail. He will do and say anything. And you see in that tweet not merely the fact that he is rattled and losing it, but that he's already coming up with his lines for why he can deny the results of the election, how Kamala Harris's nomination is unconstitutional, how this is being stolen, all of that in advance. So no one should be surprised or think that this fever is going to break on November 5th, because whatever happens, we are about to head into a very dangerous period in American politics, led by Donald Trump and obviously assisted by Republicans who simply have decided that they're not going to draw the line.
This time next week, Democrats, freshly propelled by sales so full of energy and genuine enthusiasm, will begin the process of formalizing what is self-evident. They will make Vice President Kamala Harris officially the party's standard bearer. She'll take up that mantle, having already assembled a mighty and fired-up coalition as formidable as it is diverse. Just in the last few weeks, the Harris-Walz appeal has cut across all demographics, reaching voters of all stripes, some of them previously turned off or tuned out. And this is what they are hearing.
Unlike Donald Trump, I will always, I promise you, put the middle class and working families first.
I just made a very clear observation that they seem to be really concerned about. I pointed out that taking away reproductive freedoms, banning books, raising the price of insulin, trying to hurt labor unions, nobody's asking for that weird crap. No one's asking for it.
Someone who suggests we should terminate the Constitution of the United States should never again stand behind the seal of President of the United States.
Now, these rallies are, those are not the highlights. The rallies are sustained energy, sustained enthusiasm, sustained punchlines and applause. And the vice president and her running mate's gravitational pull, unsurprisingly, is now extending well beyond what Democrats typically think of as their winning coalitions, all the way out deep into Republican territory. Many of those Republicans deeply disaffected by the MAGA movement. We have called them Never Trump Republicans, people who recognize the existential threat posed by the disgraced ex-president, and those small few who understand the concept of publicly putting country over party. These Republicans out in the country have spent nearly a decade now out on the margins, supporting Biden in 2020, but otherwise biding their time. Well, now they seem to have found an unlikely new champion, a disciple of Barack Obama, a vice president to Joe Biden, a standard bearer for their one-time rival party. Former Georgia Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan, a lifelong Republican, has already endorsed Vice President Harris. And David French added his voice. He's a leading voice of conservatism. He submitted this opinion article to the New York Times. Quote, "The only real hope for restoring a conservatism that values integrity, demonstrates real compassion, and defends our foundational constitutional principles is not to try to make the best of Trump, a man who values only himself. If he wins again, it will validate his cruelty and his ideological transformation of the Republican Party. If Harris wins, the West will still stand against Vladimir Putin, and conservative Americans will have a chance to build something decent from the ruins of a party that was once a force for genuine good in American life." And then there's the Republican mayor of Mesa, Arizona, a lifelong Republican. Listen to what he said at Kamala Harris's rally on Friday night.
The Republican Party has been taken over by extremists that are committed to forcing people in the center of the political spectrum out of the party. So I have something to say to those of us who are in the political middle. You don't owe a damn thing to that political party.
You don't owe a damn thing to that political party. The crowd went wild. You could practically reach out and feel the crackling energy infused by Vice President Harris and Governor Walz just in the last 72 hours at these huge rallies in city after city. The Harris-Walz ticket is bringing that roaring approval from the crowds that swell to 15,000 people, with people not getting in, waiting outside, so full of life and energy and purpose that Donald Trump, after first attacking it, now literally refuses to believe what he sees with his own eyes. The man whose first act as America's president was going to the CIA and lying about crowd size did it again this weekend when he falsely suggested images of jam-packed Harris rallies of the size of her crowds were AI generated. Trump, who made news today for simply scheduling a rally in the midst of a Where's Waldo period of his 2024 campaign, is now left to join some of the rest of us, sitting back and seeing just how far and how high the Harris-Walz ticket will soar. Joining our coverage, that's where we start today. Joining our coverage are some of our most favorite experts and friends. Distinguished political scholar and professor at Princeton University, Eddie Glaude is back. Also joining us, Democratic pollster and president of Brilliant Corners Research, Cornell Belcher is here. And former senator and co-host of MSNBC's How to Win 2024 podcast, Claire McCaskill is here. Cornell, stipulating that Vice President Kamala Harris describes herself as the underdog in this race. You did that in that big, huge rally in Philadelphia. And that the country is pretty closely divided in terms of how they self-identify. There is no denying what is before our eyes and what we can hear with our ears at these events, and that is that the Harris team has all the momentum. The Harris campaign has changed the structure of the race, and there will likely be, and I want to hear your opinion, but I imagine sort of a political dogfight for battles of momentum. But in terms of structural changes, it doesn't feel like there are a ton of opportunities to reshape the race. What do you think about where the race stands today?
No, I actually think there's a ton of opportunity to reshape the race. And look, as someone who worked on, 08 and 12 Obama campaigns, where I think we expanded the electorate and certainly expanded the political map in a profound way, I think the Harris coalition has an ability to even be larger and grow that. I mean, look, they're already expanding their paid media and their time and attention into more battleground states. And I think that's the key thing here is, they're not going to be sitting around on election night waiting for the results of one state to come in, which was something David Plouffe famously said of us in 08. They're expanding the map. So they're bringing more states into battle. And look, the Republican thing is interesting. In 2020, Donald Trump garnered 94% of the Republican vote, and so you see that is there opportunity now to garner more of that Republican vote? I don't know, but I certainly think that Republicans, like you've talked about here, coming out prominently, speaking against Donald Trump in a way that we've never seen Republicans come out and talk against their nominee, opens up a whole nother door, an opportunity here for Democrats to make even more inroads. And if you look at the way Democrats are winning college-educated white voters, particularly college-educated white women. Look, in 2012, we were not winning college-educated white voters like this. So I think the playing field and the coalition opportunities now are actually larger than we saw in 2012. So I think that the Democratic coalition, or at least the Democratic coalition, little d, and those who believe in democracy, I think can grow, Nicole, in a way we haven't seen before.
Yeah, I forget who said it first, but to the point you're making, I'm not sure that polls capture the movement of the pro-democracy movement, because I've kept a close eye on Republicans because there were like 4 of us in 2015, and the rest were sort of in witness protection. But this David French piece is so interesting because it's not just, I'm disgusted with Trump, we should get rid of him. It's an intellectual argument for the heart and soul of pro-life evangelical conservatism. Let me read a little bit more to you on this point about reshaping the race, sort of beyond which states fall into battlegrounds and you add a trip to. I think there's an opportunity to have almost like the way there were Reagan Democrats for a generation, and people remembered, their parents sort of switching parties because it was so seismic. I think there's an opportunity to have the inverse of that, and sort of like a Harris conservatives, for this reason that I'm going to read you that David French sort of puts his finger on. He writes this, quote, "While there are voters who are experiencing a degree of Trump nostalgia, remembering American life pre-COVID as a time of full employment and low inflation, there's a different and darker story to tell about Trump's first term. Our social fabric frayed. It's not just that abortions increased, the murder rate skyrocketed. Drug overdose deaths hit new highs. Marriage rates fell. Birth rates continue their long decline. Americans ended his term more divided than when it began. I'm often asked by Trump voters if I'm still conservative, and I respond that I can't vote for Trump precisely because I am conservative. I loathe sex abuse, pornography, and adultery. Trump has brought those vices into the mainstream of the Republican Party. I want to cultivate a culture that values human life from conception through natural death. Yet America became more brutal and violent during Trump's term. I want to defend liberal democracy from authoritarian aggression. Yet Trump would abandon our allies and risk our most precious alliances." You never, ever, 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 ever hear a prominent conservative articulate that Trump brought the specific vices of adultery and sex abuse into the mainstream, but that is exactly what he did. And I talked to you and Sarah Longwell now for months about permission structures. This feels like a new one.
It does, right? Because it's laying out the very conservative case against Donald Trump. And look, we've had this conversation on your show before. It's like none of us think that Donald Trump is actually a true conservative. And so you have true conservatives stepping up and giving them a permission structure. And look, let's lean in, also give some kudos to Liz Cheney, who I think started this. Right. And sort of leaned into this. And I think she began giving them permission structure, and that tack on it, I think, is coming full fruition now.
Kamala Harris says that 15,000 people showed up for her rally in Detroit last week. Former President Trump says the actual number was 0. And, quote, nobody was there. In a string of social media posts, Trump falsely claimed that the photos of the event were doctored on AI, calling her a cheater. Contradicting that are scores of images captured by attendees and members of the media, including from our own networks, who all were there, witnessed last week's Harris-Walz events in person. I watched it live on television. That includes, of course, Michigan Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, who not only attended the rally, she was a speaker there. Congresswoman Debbie Dingell joins me now. So were you really there, Debbie?
Hello. Good afternoon, Andrea. I was really there, and I haven't seen that large crowd in a long time, and it was great to feel the energy, the enthusiasm, and sorry, Donald Trump, you're wrong again.
So what did you witness in Detroit, and what do you make of all of these false claims on social media?
I don't know what's going on with him, quite frankly. I mean, I don't know when you had literally hundreds of media there. You had thousands and thousands of people who were there as part of the crowd. You had how many speakers? We were all there. It's a reality. So I don't think it helps Donald Trump in any credibility whatsoever for him to say that this was false, that it was AI, or it was anything else. It was, as you recall, Governor Walz came out and said this is the largest crowd we've had to date. And I think Donald Trump needs to stop the lying, which unfortunately has been a pattern since we've known him. And we need to get back to campaigning on the fact.
So the polls are slightly more favorable. They're within the margin of error in battlegrounds. You've always been very, very cautious about Michigan and how hard a state it is. What is your feeling now? Is it that this is now, a close race, but one that you can win, potentially? Whereas a lot of people thought after that debate, with a lot of Democrats thought, certainly, that after that debate that Joe Biden couldn't carry the ticket.
So I'm cautious. I feel very good, and I said it that day that I felt a lot better in August of 2024 than I did in 2016 because nobody believed me when I said that we had a problem. I've been out there last 10 days since she's become the candidate and since she has named Governor Walz as her running mate. I've been at farmers markets, union halls, veterans halls, numerous events, and there are a lot of complicated feelings. But one thing I want to say is people are just in general. The word joy is a word that I do like. They're being nicer right now. It's not to say that it couldn't turn at any second, but I was down at a car show in Flat Rock this weekend, which is traditionally a Trump area. And two people wanted to have their picture taken with me. And I said, sure. And we had a great talk. And when I walked away, someone said, those are two Trumpers. Well, 4 years ago, I might have had to have worried about whether someone was going to yell at me, whether someone was going to. There's civil conversations going on right now. I hope that continues for the fall. But I don't take Michigan for granted. We are a purple state. We're going to stay purple until Election Day. And anybody who takes Michigan for granted is making a mistake. We've got work to do. We're going to roll up our sleeves and we're going to do what we have to do.
Now, one thing that is a big issue in Michigan, certainly with the large Arab American community there, is the war. And Gaza again got hit this weekend, a school. The vice president felt she had to, because of protesters, stop and chat about it, talk about it, that she wants the ceasefire. But the chances of a ceasefire are really, really low now with these talks, given what's been happening lately and the assassination and the possibility of an attack by Iran. So how concerned are you that this is going to follow her because of the connection to the Biden administration?
Look, we have to take this issue very seriously. I know this community very well. It's a community that's hurting. I don't think Donald Trump's going to be any better for this community, and I think that there are people inside this community that know it. Some of the uncommitted had conversations with the vice president on Wednesday. They are reaching out and talking to different members of the community. One of the highest elected Arab American officials in Michigan endorsed the vice president last week, and quite frankly, got death threats and a lot of grief for it, but he feels very strongly that he did the right thing. Look, I'm very worried about this war in the Mideast, period, and it's not just Palestinians now. I don't live in Dearborn anymore, but a lot of Lebanese constituents and Lebanese friends, and they're scared to death that war could break out any minute. We need to take the situation in the Mideast very seriously. We need to understand that there are people on both sides who have family, who are very worried about what the future is going to hold. We don't want to see anybody, any more innocent people die. And Andrea, I'm not going to accept that we don't stand a chance of a ceasefire. We can never stop working towards getting a ceasefire, and I hope everybody in this administration will stay focused on that.
And very, very briefly, how concerned are you about J.D. Vance's attacks and the campaign's attacks on, Tim Walz's resume?
Look, they're going to keep doing what they're going to do, and we're going to have to push back. I think J.D. Vance is the gift that keeps on giving. What he has said about women is so degrading and so unacceptable. But I take everything that's going to happen this fall very seriously. I know what we've got to do, and I'm working with a whole lot of other people that know what we've got to do. Michigan's competitive. We know it. We're going to do the work. We're going to do the voter engagement, and we're going to turn out the votes. And we're going to be purple. You're going to ask me a week before the election, how do you feel? And I don't know quite yet. We'll see. But we're going to do the work.
A close race. Congresswoman Debbie Dingell, thanks so very much.
When we mobilize, nations change. And when we vote, we make history.
It's true, no matter how you vote. And we are now turning to a special report and panel discussion on this historic barrier that Kamala Harris has smashed, the first black woman to ever be a major party's presidential nominee in America's 248-year history. You see her standing out on this list of recent nominees, and of course it goes all the way back with her trailblazing campaign, now driving enthusiasm from our world of politics all the way to culture as it caps a long fight for representation.
Show me what democracy looks like.
I stand before you today to proudly announce I am now officially the Democratic nominee for President of the United States.
That is as strong a start as you could ask for. I think she's going to win. She seems very smart, very educated. She's vice president, and she'll do good.
Not going back can mean a rejection of the policies that have oppressed so many people in recent and far-gone history. It can also be a call to go forward towards a more enlightened and diverse leadership in this country, in contrast to the status quo. And while the color barrier fell at the White House now over 15 years ago with Obama, most racial breakthroughs have come through male leaders, reflecting how men held most leadership positions in the establishment and the civil rights movement alike. When the major leaders of most civil rights groups were gathering in the 60s and 70s, here's one such gathering, you would see a type of diversity, but you would also see all men, a template that's extended later in politics as some of those very successful and qualified leaders moved into politics and office. Take activist John Lewis, who went from civil rights work to becoming a congressman and really a national figure in the Democratic Party. Kamala Harris recently shared this image of her literally looking up to the late Lewis as memorialized in this mural. There is a great appreciation for what he did, but the barriers that were broken and the path that he paved from the civil rights movement into politics came out of that group I showed you, of men in civil rights. There's a different history for black women who also played a role in civil rights and activism and organizing, like Ella Baker.
I have had about 40 or 50 years of struggle. I had to learn that hitting back with my one individual was not enough. It takes organization. It takes dedication. It takes the willingness to stand by and do what has to be done.
Takes all that and more. And if it takes organization, those women who, as I'm reminding you, were in the struggle, were not necessarily always given the organization or backing to then go directly into politics or business or other extended activities in American life. Those women face more hurdles than men in politics. In total, black women may have made up 55 congresswomen and 93 mayors in America. And while voters do know Harris's candidacy is unusual, many people do not realize there have been very few times when Americans have had the opportunity to vote for a black woman in any top statewide offices whatsoever, the big positions in the states of governor or senator. Take the Senate's current composition: 89 white senators, 3 black men, and no elected black women. That's the composition of the Senate after Harris left. No black women left there. And she was only the second ever black woman to serve as senator. Now take the 50 governors. Right now, in America, 46 white governors, 1 black man, and 0 black women governors today. Indeed, there has never been a black female governor in the United States, ever. Voters may choose to end this color line at the White House, in other words, this year, before it has fallen in a single governor's mansion in a single state. That is a stark sign of just how rare Harris's bid is. As a black and Indian American woman, she's following the path of others who have broken barriers, like Dalip Singh Sandh, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, and Carol Moseley Braun, that first black female senator I mentioned before Harris, who also ran for president.
Breaking barriers, building bridges, bringing people together. I have been blessed to be an agent for change and progress.
Somebody's got to do it. It's not an overnight process. Just as Jesse Jackson registered voters and began a path for Obama all the way back in 1988, we can see that now. Harris allies know that Shirley Chisholm launched a then long-shot bid for president all the way back in '72 after years of bluntly confronting how, as she put it, quote, white males controlled policy and people's lives.
I feel that the cabinet and the department heads of this country must have women, must have blacks, and not be completely and totally controlled constantly by white males.
That was then, but as I've just shown you in the facts, that is also largely now. These historic milestones can also transcend partisanship, which is very important. We need civil rights breakthroughs totally separate from the endless red-blue debates. Former Congresswoman Mia Love was the first black woman elected to the House as a Republican, a good thing. Republican Lieutenant Governor Winsome Sears, the first woman of color to take that post in Virginia. And beyond elective office, we've also seen black women rise in appointed leadership positions. Presidents in both parties have tapped leaders like Condi Rice, Susan Rice, Loretta Lynch, Linda Thomas Greenfield. President Biden cemented a big part of his legacy for picking not only Harris, but the first black woman to ever serve on the Supreme Court. And that's in comparison to the 108 white men who have held those jobs in the court's history. The numbers show how rare and significant this moment is, and that's regardless of your gender or political affiliation or who you want to vote for in November. It's a big deal. Now, many people cheered Reagan putting the first woman on the Supreme Court. That is a diversity pledge that he made in advance, just as Biden took this next step and pledging to put a black woman on the court. It is a type of DEI. It is a well-known fact that Ronald Reagan brought that DEI approach to staffing the Supreme Court as a Republican. Fact. Now, that's the context for this moment in history and our discussion tonight as Kamala Harris runs for the White House. She won her first federal office the same night that Donald Trump won the presidency, and then rose quickly to be on her party's ticket in the very next presidential cycle. And along the way, she has invoked this long historical path of black women fighting and sometimes rising in civic and political life.
Kamala Harris will replace fellow Democrat Barbara Boxer as the next U.S. Senator from the Golden State.
Have now confirmed that Secretary Clinton has conceded to Donald Trump.
There's one star who hasn't been talked about tonight who is going to be talked about a lot, and her name is Kamala Harris.
Women who fought and sacrificed so much for equality and liberty and justice for all, including the black women who are too often overlooked, but so often prove they are the backbone of our democracy.
What Donald Trump is offering in terms of policy is as radical a departure from normal American politics as anything that has ever happened in any of our lifetimes.
Tonight I reflect on their struggle, their determination, and the strength of their vision to see what can be unburdened by what has been. And I stand on their shoulders.
What can be unburdened? And how do black women, as Harris put it, look at this next effort to calcify that backbone she mentioned so that we might have a pluralistic and imperfect democracy that improves? As you can see, we are here gathered in a special. We have not only some special guests I'm about to show you, but in a room here we have on the walls a lot of the experiences and the history that we want to learn from and that may yet inform the future. For this special discussion, we are joined by Maya Wiley, who's known for many things in her civil rights work, but in this context, a black woman who recently ran for mayor in New York, finishing second. That's America's largest city. Donna Edwards, the first black woman to represent Maryland in Congress. Lori Lightfoot, the first black woman mayor of Chicago. And we'll also ask about Kamala Harris's push to break the highest glass ceiling with a historian from her own alma mater when we return.
All right, let's get into it. Joining us now, NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba, NBC News senior political editor Mark Murray, and the man behind the Youth Vote, Harvard Kennedy School Institute of Politics Director of Polling, John Della Volpe. All right, Monica, this has been a 3-week stretch for Harris. That's just been good news headline after good news headline. What can you tell us from the perspective of the campaign?
Yeah, and it's been a momentum wave, to use your language there, Katie, that they do want to keep riding, and they hope will continue this week into the Democratic National Convention, where they know all of the eyeballs will be upon them and where they are hoping to have this big major moment that is celebratory in nature, and where they hope a lot of this can kind of come together and Vice President Harris can formally accept that nomination and then hit that real typical sprint that you would see in September and October into November. But because we basically got a preview and a mini version of what that looks like over the last 3 weeks, there are a couple things that they're really very, very much focused on. And obviously in those initial days, it was picking a running mate for the vice president, which they feel that they did quite well, and which they've been very happy in the results of what they saw, they say, over the last couple of days in that battleground state tour. And you're showing on the screen there part of what they're so happy about, and it's the optics. It's being able to say that there hasn't been this kind of enthusiasm among Democrats in some time. And those crowds, which you know very well, are something that appear to have gotten under Donald Trump's skin in some capacity. That is also for them a major victory in this couple of weeks that they weren't necessarily anticipating. And I'm told by the campaign that when they're now talking about future events and future swing states, that the appeal and the real desire and what people want to see is so high that they don't even know how to find venues that will potentially accommodate all of that. So that is a good problem to have. But this week they get to the thornier part of it, and that's the actual policy rollout. They now have to focus on what Vice President Harris could run on that would be different from President Biden, what he was doing as a candidate, while also walking this fine line of trying to say that the Biden-Harris administration has had accomplishments, but here's what we could do. They're going to argue, and you're going to see that on display when they're together, the president and vice president, Thursday in Maryland, if she is the one to win the White House in November. But she has to start spelling out her vision for how she sees that, again, on a really compressed timeline, which we'll hear more about at the DNC.
You know,
as well.
the crowd size and the search for new and bigger arenas reminds me of 2016. There was always that search for new and bigger arenas for Donald Trump, and their advance man was constantly on the move doing that. So I understand what the Harris campaign is now going through. I'm sure the Democrats are absolutely thrilled to be in that position, to have to find a bigger capacity stadium. Mark, the enthusiasm that we're seeing on the ground is now translating into the numbers. I know we've been waiting for some better quality polling to come out, a little bit of time to have passed after the transition from Biden to Harris. What can you tell us about this new New York Times Siena poll? What do you see in it?
Yeah, it's just further confirmation that we have a reset contest, Katie, where you now have Harris ahead by 4 points in all three of these key battleground states. Importantly, within the margin of error, but that's actually a change from what we ended up seeing in the New York Times Siena surveys from back in the spring, as well as in Pennsylvania right after that debate in July. And Katie, really what stands out to me is just the popularity boost for Harris now becoming the Democratic standard bearer. In the Pennsylvania New York Times Siena poll from back in July, President Biden had a -20 net favorability rating, according to that poll. Compare that now with Harris at +2. That's a 22-point swing when it comes to favorability. Donald Trump's favorability numbers haven't changed all that much between July and now, but with the change at the top of the Democratic ticket might be the biggest change in all the polling that we have seen so far, with Harris now at the top of the ticket.
So Nate Cohn, who does the polling for the Times, helps to do it, says that what Harris is doing right now, Mark, is showing that she is the generic candidate. And he meant that in a good way. What does it mean for Harris to be running like a generic Democratic candidate? Why would that actually be a compliment?
It's a compliment because usually a generic candidate does better than someone whose name that has all the baggage and the issues and the scandals that end up getting litigated. And right now she's floating above a plane in which she's not having to deal with the policy rollouts, with the kind of negative attacks that you normally end up seeing. And Katie, one thing that we've seen consistently over the past year is how Democratic candidates like Bob Casey in Pennsylvania, like Tammy Baldwin in Wisconsin, even like Alyssa Slotkin in Michigan, were always doing better than President Biden. That they were kind of almost that generic candidate, just basically the D candidate without any kind of baggage. And now all of a sudden we are seeing Vice President Kamala Harris do that at the top of the Democratic ticket. And to me, the biggest kind of question is this all part of the Democratic honeymoon that we've seen with the change at the top of the ticket, or will this end up lasting over the next 3 months? And I think the answer to that question could very well end up deciding this presidential contest.
So, John, I was looking at your polling on the youth vote, and I noticed that the graphs that you had from the age group to the demographics to college degree, without a college degree, Republican, Democrat, independent, this is not the one, but just the group of graphs that you had separating out each group of these potential voters, every single one of them ended up on a high note. Everyone right up. Kamala Harris started here and she ended up here. Tell me about that.
Sure. Well, Katie, you talked about this campaign reminds you of 2016. To me, this reminds me of 2008 and then 2018. In 2008, millennials banded together with the idea of something better in terms of the way in which our politics could be run and envisioned by Barack Obama. That hopefulness is something that I see in this new wave of polling. But in addition to that hopefulness, I also see the fight, the determination, the grit of Gen Zers after Parkland. This combination, I think, of the Obama plus the Parkland vibe and enthusiasm is, I think, what is driving these double-digit increases over the last 3 weeks. As you said, there is a plus 16-point increase in her favorability. There is a plus 13-point increase in her margin over Donald Trump. In every single subgroup within the electorate, a majority of those indicate they are more enthusiastic about her being on the ticket than they had at any time in recent history. It's something that is quite extraordinary. It's an ascension. These are not blips. This is an ascension.
I should mention the only subgroup that I saw that didn't go up, that was flat, were Republicans, but independents, again, everybody went up. The youth vote is something that every campaign says it's going to capture. They want it, but the youth vote can be very difficult to get in a sizable way. Are you seeing anything different here? I mean, you talked about 2018 and 2008, yes. Do you think that momentum stays here? And if it does stay here, is there a driving policy factor behind Kamala Harris to help those voters not just say they're enthusiastic, but actually go to the polls in November, John?
Yeah, I think three numbers in particular that I'm looking at in this new wave of polling are these attributes. Significant numbers of young people say she's listening, she cares about them, and that she's fighting for the things that they care about. So those are the qualities and attributes that young people seek in a modern president, and she is improving every single day on those things. Beyond that, younger people will want to see her values to ensure that they're aligned where they are, and I believe that they are, and then her vision for the future. So again, these are the earliest days. She has their attention. Many are helping her on social media lift up the excitement that they see across these rallies. But again, there's plenty of room to grow. She needs to grow. And again, aligning her values and her vision with the values and the vision of this generation will be what will, I think, extend this lead to get to from the mid-50s to 60% margin, which a 60% share, which is where she'll need to be.
Yeah, and I think it should be said that she can organically play on social media in a way that Joe Biden couldn't, and in a way that Donald Trump is now a step behind on as well, which I think is helping her among the youth vote as well. John Della Volpe, thank you so much. Mark Murray, Monica Alba, thank you guys as well.
There's new analysis showing a dramatic drop in violent crime across major U.S. cities. 54 of 69 major cities in the report saw drops in violent crime in the first half of 2024. That's according to the Axios review of a report from the Major Cities Chiefs Association, a group of police executives. Axios, which published the data, says it puts a major dent in one of Donald Trump's central talking points and opens up a window of opportunity for Kamala Harris. Back with me, MSNBC political analyst and former HUD Secretary Julian Castro. So crime is something you know from both a micro and a macro level. I think you were on the city council before you became mayor of San Antonio. Of course, you ran for president. You were HUD secretary. So what does a Kamala Harris do with this? Because we know how effective the issue of crime has been for the Trump campaign.
Well, absolutely, Chris. I mean, this is an issue that Republicans tend to run on as many times as they can. We all remember the infamous Willie Horton ad that George H.W. Bush ran against Michael Dukakis. They argue that Democrats are soft on crime. And that's the fiction that Trump is telling in this cycle, whether it's on the border or it's with violent crime happening in the country. And here's the thing. Every night people watch on the evening news. They watch crime reporting after crime reporting. That old adage that if it bleeds, it leads generally is true on local TV news. And so it's particularly important for the Harris campaign to be able to tell the story effectively. I mean, and she's tailor-made for this. She was a prosecutor. She's worked with law enforcement. She's also worked with communities out there to make sure that policing is done right. So she has a strong case to make here. I think she's making it. I would not be surprised if she goes on the offense on this issue like they did with the border a few days ago to try and dispel the fiction and the overblown narrative that Donald Trump and his campaign are giving. And I think here the hope is that people will actually listen to the facts that violent crime is down 6% across the board. In some communities, it's down as much as 25%. But hey, we know from 2016, we know from the way that Donald Trump operates that you can't count on facts winning out because he's going to keep telling fiction over and over and over again. Kamala Harris is going to need to be just as energetic about laying those facts out and laying out how she would work with local communities to keep making sure that violent crime goes down and that people are safe.
That's the conundrum, right? Because even before this new study came out that Axios reported on, I'm going to go to an analysis of a number of studies from the Brennan Center. And here's what they said. Numerous studies show that immigration is not linked to higher levels of crime, but rather the opposite. This is showing Reuters, but I'm reading from, in fact, the Brennan Center. So my question to you is, why is that not getting through?
Because I think that people are often predisposed to believe that crime is going up. And I think a lot of it does have to do with the local news media environment. You turn on the TV and there's constant reporting about every shooting, every act of violent crime out there. That literally is what leads the 5, 6, and 10 o'clock news every night.
But
and
you
so
know
it's
that's
hard.
not going to change. So that's a problem, right?
This is why Republicans especially try and use this issue against Democrats. But here's the thing. The facts are that violent crime has gone down and that this administration has worked with local communities to ensure that people are safe. So the facts are on her side. And now it's about making sure that the message is there, that it's clearly and consistently put out there. I think you see them already doing that. And I believe that enough people are going to be able to see through the smokescreen that Donald Trump is trying to create between now and November.
Julian Castro, it's good to have you on the show. Thank you. Appreciate it.